If you've been following me for a while, you know that I appreciate a mystery, and I ran across one a couple weeks ago at an estate sale. This is an Outland branded graphic equalizer from an indeterminate year that was very dirty and covered in what I'm pretty sure was very old cat pee. It was also a brand I'd never heard of, and it had no model number whatsoever, so I thought it might be interesting to try to figure out where it came from. And for $5 I couldn't really say no, so that's what I'm going to share with you guys today. So, as I said, Outland is a brand I've never come across. That being the case, I wanted to know more about it. Again, that's why I bought it. And it turned into a little bit of a rabbit hole that gets into the messy jungle that is OEM manufacturers. Nonetheless, it ended up being kind of interesting to me, so I wanted to share that journey with you guys. But before we get into it, let me ask you a question. What do you guys think of having a graphic equalizer in your setup? Do you use one? Do you have one? And do you like it? And also, where does yours sit in the signal chain? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious to hear how everybody feels about them because they seem to be a little bit divisive. So, first and foremost, it needed to be cleaned. If you remember my last video, I emphasized the importance of bringing gloves when you're at estate sales. This is exactly the reason. I knew it worked already, so when I brought it home, the very first thing I did was completely disassemble it and wash everything. The shell, the chassis, the faceplate, the screws got a bath in detergent. Even the little lighted slider knobs got washed and re-glued. While everything was drying in my kitchen, I took some time to look up the brand Outland. I was able to find one other example of this same unit for sale, but I didn't manage to find anything else they had made or any mention of the company itself, which is our first clue. This is not an established audio company. Knowing that, we can safely assume that this was a rebranded OEM component. With that in mind, I decided to look for clues on the internal components. The first place I looked was on the main board. I was hoping to find a manufacturer badge somewhere on the white silk screen that labels all the little components, but no luck. The bottom read Tianyin 194V0, which didn't help. Tianyin yielded no results, and the numerical code is simply a safety certification that means the PCB is fire resistant. That's actually going to come up later. But I checked the transformer and the slider pots, and they also had nothing helpful. The LED panel did have two codes printed on it, T8616 and LTG8601M. That was the second place I started looking, but it didn't turn up any results either. I couldn't find documentation of a manufacturer that uses those specific codes for anything. However, the T8616 is almost certainly a date code. It would have been the 16th week of 1986, so April of 86 is when the panel was manufactured. That gives us a ballpark date because we can assume that the EQ would have been assembled shortly after that. Unfortunately, that still doesn't tell us where this came from because a lot of companies would have sourced a panel like that separately rather than spending the money on design and tooling to manufacture something like that in-house, especially for a short run like this. So, next I looked at the little board on the side with these four switches. That's when I noticed something odd. Look at the lettering on the silk screen. It's handwritten. Notice it's different from the perfect lettering on the main board. This piece was designed by a different team that didn't use templates or CNC for lettering, so it's probably a smaller run than the main board. Working under the assumption that the main board is an OEM part, it stands to reason that this little one was probably created specifically for whoever assembled this version of the equalizer and slapped the Outland label on it. Knowing that, I went online and I started looking at graphic equalizers from the mid-80s. I just sat down and combed through images until I found exactly what I expected. 3 different examples of this same EQ with different brands on it and only slight variations. The Centrec SHQ4210B, the AudioSource EQ8 Series 2, and the Rotel Equalizer RE830. As you can see, they're all basically the same with slight variations on the printing, the knobs, and the button placement, which means they would have had their own faceplate and button boards manufactured, but used the same main PCB, chassis, and LED panel. Now, each of those brands actually did come up with something upon searching. AudioSource and Rotel are brands that still exist and sell audio equipment. Centrec was almost entirely dedicated to car audio in the 80s and early 90s and didn't seem to sell home audio components except, for some reason, graphic equalizers. AudioSource didn't manufacture things themselves from what I found. They would source products they wanted to sell and apply their housing and label, at least in the 80s. I don't know if that's still how they do it. Rotel, on the other hand, did actually have internal engineering, but they focused on amplifiers and tuners mostly. From what I could gather, when they did outsource manufacturing, it would have been for things like this, especially since it's not a high-end product. So I took to Google some more, and I happened across a fifth example of this same unit, but this time it was branded TIAC. It was the TIAC EQA10, and that one uses the same faceplate, buttons, and white silkscreen print. The font is even the same. The only difference is the lack of LED lights in the sliders, and it says TIAC on the front instead of Outland. Now, it's perfectly plausible that TIAC did like everyone else and slapped their brand on an OEM part too. So I figured I should look a little deeper into TIAC. One of my first videos was on the realistic TR3000 reel-to-reel tape deck. It's a rebranded TIAC X3 machine. According to what I read, TIAC's primary focus was tape at the time. They designed and manufactured tape transport mechanisms, tape heads, and all the electronics that supported that. Tascam, I learned, is also the professional recording branch of TIAC. I record these videos on a Tascam HDP2, so that was kind of cool to find out. But because they were really only focused on making tape gear, manufacturing anything superficial like a graphic equalizer would have been something that they would have likely outsourced. So that still doesn't tell us who made this thing. But I did find one other very important thing. TIAC had a line of graphic equalizers at the time, and they all had the same design language but with different physical dimensions and layouts. And look at the knobs that they used on the sliders of the EQA5. Look familiar? The one that seems to get the most recognition in this line is the EQA20. That one's a little bit bigger, but its overall design matches the other two. The main board is populated almost entirely with Matsushita ICs. That's Panasonic. They were one of the go-to manufacturers for reliable chips in the Japanese supply chain. Cheaper products would have used unlabeled chips from all over Asia, which you don't see in here. So even though this isn't a high-end product, it did maintain a certain minimum quality, which was expected by companies like TIAC, AudioSource, and Rotel. Based on all that, I believe TIAC defined the platform of this EQ, its specs, visual language, features, and so on, then had it all built by another manufacturer. That company then supplied very similar modular versions of the same platform to other companies with slight variations since they already had all the tooling to make things in bulk. That was typical if the original company didn't pay for exclusivity, which allowed other companies to sell a product they didn't have the resources to design and build themselves. In this case, a company in Taiwan, which I suspect was probably called Qianyin. So I guess we should take a look at what this thing actually does, yeah? It's a graphic equalizer. The way it works is you put it in line between a component like a tuner or tape deck or CD player and the amp itself. And it allows you to select specific frequency bands in the audio signal and either boost or suppress them to compensate for the limitations of cheap speakers, or just to your own personal taste. It works just like the bass and treble knobs on your amp, but more divided up. The word graphic just simply refers to the fact that it gives a graph-like visual representation of what you're doing to the signal. It was coined by C. Paul Bonner in the 1930s when he developed equalization systems for auditoriums and theaters. The idea is that you can isolate and adjust a small frequency range if it's really harsh or too muffled so that everything is properly audible. The power button is on the far left. When it comes on, we get a little red LED light on each one of these sliders. There are two sets of 10, one for the left channel and one for the right. Each slider adjusts a small range of sound frequencies centered around the one specified above the slider itself. The lowest at the bottom of the spectrum is 30 Hz, moving all the way up to 16 kHz. Because this allows you to both boost and reduce frequencies, the center position is neutral. So as it sits now, there's no change to the sound. We'll play with the sliders in a minute. In the center is an LED spectrum display. It shows the audio signal split into its constituent frequencies in real time as it plays. I'm sure most of you understand what a spectrum display is. The buttons on the right are EQ, Monitor, Source, and Line Out. The first one on the left engages and disengages the equalization completely. Next, you have a monitor switch, which behaves just like the tape monitor switch on an amplifier. The source switch selects which input source the original signal comes from, and finally the line out switch simply bypasses all the internal hardware and sends the input signal directly to the line out. If that seems a little confusing, just imagine that you'd wire this up the same as a tape deck and it'll make sense. You can reference how to hook up a tape deck here. Something to keep in mind, an equalizer does not bring out parts of a recording that aren't already present. It's better at suppressing things that are too harsh than boosting things that are too quiet. Where it really shines is paired with small, inexpensive speakers like the realistic Minimus 77s. Despite their cult following and collectability, these are not hi-fi speakers, but they can be made to sound a lot better with a signal that's been equalized specifically for them. I'm going to do a quick demo of the sound so that you can get an idea of what this actually does. You have to forgive the sound quality. That was the best positioning I could find for the microphone that gets close to how it sounds in person. Now let's run the signal again with all the sliders at 0, and I'm going to change each one so that you can hear which part of the spectrum they affect. We'll start at 30 Hertz. Hopefully that gives you at least an idea of what this does. On the back are all of your input and output stereo RCA jacks. And on the right is an AC outlet to plug in another component if you need to. It's unswitched, which means as long as the EQ is plugged in, the outlet is live regardless of whether it's powered on. This little label claims that this thing draws 10 watts. The audiophile consensus that I could find seemed to have mixed feelings on these things. The two main points of contention are one, that it's adding another component into the signal path, which does introduce some degree of distortion and buzz. This thing certainly does. And also, making the adjustments that this thing facilitates is contradictory to the purity of the original recording. That's perfectly valid. But I submit that if you do like using these things, there's nothing wrong with that, because ultimately it's your setup and you can enjoy it any way that you want. And I think that they're meant to clean up cheaper setups, not enhance fancy ones. If we look inside again, there's something I need to point out. This stain is soot, which means something burned up in here. There's also a dark area on the central PCB right under the soot stain. So it was one of these components, and most likely it was one or both of these resistors. You can even see how it cooked this glue. If you notice, these resistors supply power to the LED lights in the slider knobs. Not to get too into the weeds, but a quick glance under the board showed me that these two capacitors, these two transistors, and these two resistors are all connected. And I'd hazard a guess that one of these capacitors dried up and failed, causing one of these transistors to draw too much current and burn up one of these resistors. Chances are it's this one, since this cap still has soot on it, which means it predates the failure. I'm sure that whatever happened, aside from making a little smoke show, disabled the LEDs on the slider knobs. That's when the previous owner likely noticed and fixed it himself. Either that or when the cat did his business on it. The reason I think this was a home repair is because I bought this and this from him. Anybody who owns an oscilloscope and a frequency counter like this probably fancies themselves handy, which I make no claim to be. He also had all these things as well, which will be videos in the future. Let me know if there's anything in this pile that you recognize and would like to see next. The holidays have been crazy and I've been really busy, so I apologize for not getting these videos out sooner. Hopefully, when things calm down, if they calm down, I'll be able to release videos more regularly. Until then, thank you for watching, stay metal, and keep thrifting.